The purpose of this tutorial is to show a couple of things, sort of better ways you might do things on the whiteboard. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is how if you've written something and let's say that it's wrong or it's just not neat enough so the student doesn't actually know what you wrote, how you can fix that. So one way, let's say that I was trying to illustrate this angle right in here, and it's kind of small to actually write the 55 degrees that would be. So, maybe you did something like this, and, you didn't write it very well. I mean, maybe that's 55 degrees, maybe it isn't. So you can use the undo button. Okay, that's not a bad thing to do. The only problem is, so let's say I had done this and I'd written my 55, or maybe I made a mistake and thought it was 50 or something like that. And let's say you'd had written a couple of other things. I'm adding 125 and the exterior angles and 95, etc. And the 90 out here, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, that was 50. Well, if I use the undo, then I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let be like the 12th, 13th last undo. So now, if I use the erase, see if I try to erase that, the problem is I've clicked on the diagram. So I can go undo and I'll get the diagram back. And actually, I think that's showing me an instance of where that 50 is actually behind the diagram now. Okay, so I've not actually, that's the first time I've been able to reproduce that. So it's not a good idea to write on diagrams because for one or more of the users, that's behind the diagram. And it can sometimes be that the tutor still sees it, but the student can't, or vice versa. So writing on diagrams isn't a great idea. Now, the other thing you can do, so let's just get rid of, okay, so I'm not on the diagram now, so it's not a big deal if I do that. Now, the other thing you can do is, let's say I had written, my incorrect 50 here. Actually, it's even neat. So I can't undo it, or, especially if you've written a bunch of things. So what you can do is, and if it's a whole bunch of things, you might not want to do this, but there's only 4 things to move there. So I'm off the diagram, and I can erase that. Now, this is a good example of why using text boxes is a good idea. Because, so here's my text box, I did the 50 degrees wrong, but in order to, actually, there we go, I grabbed a hold of it. So if I had done that incorrectly, I could just edit that. I could go in here and edit it. Or, I could grab the hand tool and bring it off here in one thing instead of having to move the arrow and the degree and the 0 and the 5 separately. And then if I wanted to just delete that, I could. So another thing I wanted to show is showing a student calculations. Now, you can't do this sort of live, but DESMOS is something we use quite a bit. I'm going to bring DESMOS over here so that you can see the whole thing here. There we go. So let's say I want to evaluate the inverse sign of some number. Now, the way you get that keyboard back is like this. Now, I don't see any trig here, so here's where the functions are. So let's say it was the inverse sign of 0.8536 or something like that. Now, if you were tutoring in grade 10, you might look at this, oh, yeah, that's not right. That's in radians. So this is where you change from, and it'll default to radians, so click on degrees, so it's 58.6 degrees there. So, and of course, if you click in here anywhere, that's gone. And, let's say I wanted to do an inverse cosine now of, let's say, 0.5, give us 60 degrees. So that's how you can do that. Now, the student can't see this, but what you could do is, now I'm doing this in Windows 10 here. So I'm using the snipping tool. I'm sure there's something similar on Apple devices. And of course, I have to save that. I'll just call it capture. So I'm going to move this out of the way. I'll move my DESMOS out of the way, and I'm going to go and grab that capture, which is right here. So, and then of course the student can see that. Okay, I use again, I'm using a Windows device here. I use this graphing calculator quite a bit. It's a virtual TI-83 Plus, and again, I just do snipping tool to evaluate, to take a picture of whatever I want. So, for example, a little bit before this, I uploaded this calculation. It's a cosine law. You might recognize it. Application, and of course, I can show then exactly the student what I've done. Sometimes we'll be helping students with a calculation, and I'm going to go to the image bank here, and you're trying to, there's 6 different fairly common calculators here. So, if you're trying to explain to them, let's say the inverse cosine thing, you're talking about hitting the second and the sine, or second and the cosine, or second and tan, whichever one it is. So you can actually, most scientific calculators are somewhat similar to that. Often it's a second function before one of these, or, maybe you're trying to explain to them somehow to use the fraction key. It looks like this, so they can see it. And of course, like there's the pi key if you're using pi or something like that. So, so there's just a few helpful hints that you can use to do things perhaps even a bit better on a whiteboard than not. So just a few suggestions, and that's the end of this tutorial.